Hello, my name is Florian and I welcome you to IT Tech Tips. In the last episode, we have joined our clients to the domain, but we have not been able to log in to the PCs yet because we did not have any real users in the domain. In this episode, we're going to create organizational units, users and groups. I am also going to show you a way of how we can centrally manage on our WhoAmI-DC01 which users have local administrator permissions on the client PCs in the domain. After that, I'm going to show you an even better way how to do that. But please do not skip the suboptimal way, because this will be also part of the learning process. Let's have a look. For this episode, we're going to need our WhoAmI-router and our WhoAmI-DC01 to begin with. So make sure both of these virtual PCs are running. If they're not, start first WhoAmI-router, wait for about 5 minutes and then start WhoAmI-DC01. When they're running, log in to WhoAmI-DC01 with our administrator. After everything has booted, go to Active Directory, Users and Computers, which should be pinned to your taskbar already. On the left side of the window, right-click on your domain and choose New Organizational Unit. An organizational unit is kind of like a folder in your file system in which you can organize stuff in your Active Directory. For example, users, groups and computer accounts. We are going to call our new organizational unit Domain Normal Users. And we keep the checkbox Protect Container from Accidental Deletion checked. This checkbox will prevent you from deleting the organizational unit by accident. You can still delete it if you like it, but it's then a rather complicated process in which you have to find the checkbox first. It's quite hidden after you click Next, and uncheck it. But keep it checked for now, because usually you don't want to delete an organizational unit. Click OK and repeat this step, a new organizational unit, to create a second one, which we will then call Domain Pilot Users. We will maybe use this organizational unit in the future to showcase some pilot scenarios. We're not going to use it in this lesson though. Also keep the checkbox Protect checked and click OK. Now make sure that you are within the organizational unit domain Normal Users. Right-click on the right side in the empty space, select New and User. We are going to call our new user Donald Duck, first name Donald, last name Duck, with the login name donald.duck. Click Next and enter the password we're using for everything in our lab environment, which is password with a capital P, a capital W, the number 0 for the letter O and an exclamation mark at the end. Uncheck the checkbox that the user must change his password at the next logon. Usually you can keep this checked in a real-life scenario, because normally you don't want to know the password of a user. So you can set a default password here and keep this checkbox checked, and then the user must enter your default password, but at the first logon he or she has to change it so you don't know the password and you're not liable for any deleted files or something like that. But in our lab environment we can safely uncheck it because we know all the passwords anyway. If you would check user cannot change password, this would prohibit the user from changing his or her password. This may be useful in a scenario where you have technical users like service accounts and you don't want any other administrator messing around with this password. So this is a way you can prohibit it at least a little bit. If you would check password never expires, then this setting would override any password policies, which would require the user to change his or her password, for example, every 90 days. And if you would check account is disabled, then you could configure the user with all its settings, group memberships, group policy objects, etc. But nobody would be able to log in with this user. So this would be a good way to prepare, for example, a large deployment, but not activate it yet. We keep all the checkboxes unchecked for our lab scenario and click Next. On the last page of the wizard, you will see a quick summary. Read it to make sure you didn't make any mistakes, and then click Finish. Right-click, New User. The next one will be DaisyDuck, with the logon name daisy.duck, and the same password. Uncheck all checkboxes, click Next and Finish. Now let's have a look at Donald Duck by right-clicking on the account and selecting Properties. Click on the tab Account, and here you will see the data you have entered, the user logon name, and the settings you created in the wizard regarding the passwords. And you also have the option to unlock an account, because for several security reasons it may have happened that the account was locked. For example, after the summer vacation, the user comes back, enters his password wrong for several times, and his account gets locked. And here is a way to unlock it. Right-click on the user, Properties, tap Account, and check Unlock Account. Also click on the tab Profile. Here you can set a user profile path for roaming profiles, which is not needed anymore nowadays, and I do not recommend setting it, except for very specific scenarios when all clients are really similar. But nowadays, with the whole bring your own device topic, this is really more of a pain in the neck than anything else. But you could also set a logon script here, for example, to connect network drives for a user account at the logon. By the way, we will do that in a later episode in our Extending the Lab series. You could also set the path to a user home directory here, which will typically be at the drive H or the drive U in most environments I have encountered so far. You can now click on the tab Member Of, which will show you in what groups this user is included. By default, a user is always in the group Domain Users. So be careful what kind of access permissions you give to the group Domain Users, because by default every user in your domain is in this group. Now click on Cancel, just in case, to be on the safe side if you would have changed anything by playing around. And we can start our first client, Acme-Client 01. After it has started, click on Other User. And as we have seen in the last episode, you now have the option to sign in to our domain Acme Corp, because this client is now joined to the domain. In the field username, enter donald.duck. Also make sure that it says sign in Acme Corp. And the login will take quite some time in your environment, because in this video I sped this up, but it can take easily 2 to 3 minutes until the user profile, which is now being created, is done and complete. So wait for a few moments, and after that you should see the desktop of Windows 10. Right-click the Windows logo, select Run, and enter CMD, which stands for Command. And in the command prompt, enter the string WhoAmI in one word, WhoAmI. And as a result, you should get Acme Corp, which is the domain, /donald.duck. So this is an easy way to find out with which user you are logged in, or with what credentials a command prompt has been started. Now start Acme-Client 02 and repeat the same process, Other User, but this time we're using daisy.duck. As soon as you see the desktop, after the user profile for daisy.doc was created on acme-client 02, this concludes our first chapter. You now have 2 working clients and 2 working users, which we have tested in our domain Acme Core. Currently, the user John Doe, which we have created a long time ago, is a local administrator on both of our clients acme-client 01 and 02. This is bad because we have no central control over this user account. It just exists locally on these PCs, and if someone would find out the password, he could access both of these clients with local administrator credentials. And usually we do not want that. Usually we want our users not to have administrator credentials locally on their PC, nor of course in the domain. So how can we fix that? Now that we know that our users can log into the domain, because we have tested that with Donald.doc on client 01 and with Daisy.doc on client 02, now that we know that, it would be neat if we had a domain user with local administrator permissions, so we can control centrally on acme-dc01 in our Active Directory what password this user has, if their account is locked or unlocked, and what password policies apply to this account. And that's what we're going to do now. First, make sure that you are within acme-client 02. Now right-click on the Windows logo and select Computer Management. On the left side of the window, go to Local Users and Groups, and there select Groups. As you can see, there is one group called Administrators. This is the local administrators group. Do not confuse that with the administrators group in the domain. This one is just local for acme-client 02. Right-click on Administrators and choose Properties. Here you see a list of users which are within this group. As you can see, we have 3 entries. The first entry, Acme Core /domain admins, was created by default when you joined the client acme-client 02 to the domain. So a domain administrator by default has also local administrative permissions on the clients which are joined to the domain. This is part of the trust between a client computer and the domain controller. The second account is called Administrator, without the S at the end. This administrator account is disabled. So even though it exists, I think it's for historical reasons, because before Windows 10 you had a local administrator account which was called Administrator. Nowadays, with the setup wizard and all, you can enter your own name. So this account is still existing, but is disabled. Nobody can use it by default. And the third account is the John Doe user we have created ourselves when setting up the clients. For the time being, just click Cancel. We're coming back to that in a few moments. Now go to acme-dc01 so we can create a new user account which will become administrator on acme-client 02. You should still be in the Active Directory users and computers. Navigate to Domain Normal Users and right-click into the empty space and create a new user. And we're going to call this user Client Admin. First name Client, last name Admin. With the user logon name client.admin. Click Next and enter our default password. You want to select a really secure password in a real-life scenario. For our lab environment, we're just using our password. Keep all checkboxes unchecked, as we did with Donald.doc and Daisy.doc. Read the summary page and click Finish. This user, client.admin, which exists in the Active Directory at the moment, is also a member of the domain users groups and has no connection to any of our client computers whatsoever. That's what we're going to have to do now manually. So for our showcase, go to acme-client 01, which should be logged in with the user Donald.doc at the moment. right-click on the Windows logo and select Computer Management, as we did before with Client 02. Also go to Local Users and Groups, select Groups, and choose the properties of the administrators group. Also, as before, here are 3 user accounts: the domain admins group, the administrator, which is disabled, and the user John Doe. This was just a short repetition. As you can see, the administrator account is also disabled on Client 01. You can sign out now, and I'm going to show you how you can log on locally after you have been logged on to the domain. Because if you would just enter John Doe, the client PC would want to connect with the domain user John Doe, which does not exist, and the login would fail. So as soon as you see the login prompt, select Other User and start entering with a /. And as you can see, it changed from sign in to Acme Corp to sign in to Acme-Client 01. Enter our highly secure and secret password and continue. Now again, right-click on the Windows logo, go to Computer Management, Local Users and Groups, and double-click on Administrators, or right-click and choose Properties. And now we're going to add our domain user client.admin. And on the right side of the window, select Check Names. Check Names will do a comparison between the string client.admin you have entered with the domain controller to check whether a user with this name exists. But the client needs access to the Active Directory, which it doesn't have because it's not logged into domain. Remember, we have logged on locally with our John Doe user. So the server Acme-DC01 does not know who's asking, and for security reasons will not answer to any queries. So you can simply provide here any domain user you have the credentials. In our case here it's donald.duck, for example, or daisy.duck, and this will suffice for the Active Directory controller to hand out this information whether a user exists. So enter donald.duck with our password and click on OK. And as you can see, the name resolution worked. Now you can select our user John Doe and remove it from the administrators group. So the user John Doe now does not exist anymore on this PC, and the administrator account is disabled by default. So the only way to get local administrator permissions now is to use our domain user client.admin, which makes this client PC much more secure, and you have more control over it as an administrator for this domain. You can now sign out of Acme-Client 01, and we're going to do the exact same steps on Acme-Client 02. Go to Acme-Client 02, right-click on the Windows logo and select Sign Out. Because DaisyDuck does not have local administrative permissions, select Other User and log in with John Doe, so /John Doe, etc. Go to the Computer Management and remove John Doe from the group administrators and add our user client.admin as we did before. Here we can provide the credentials of daisy.duck, so the domain controller replies to our query from check names. Again, sign out of this client, select Other Users and log in with our client.admin. After the profile has been created, you should see the desktop and the login succeeded. So far we have talked only about users, but we can also put users together in a group and then assign permissions and group policies and other things to the group instead of each user. And that's what we're going to do now. Make sure that all of your systems are running and go to acme-dc01. If you haven't started it already, go to Active Directory Users and Computers. And so that we have enough users to play around with, we have to create 2 more users. So we are creating dagobert.doc with the password we are always using and the user mickey.mouse. By now you should know how it works. Create the user, new user, the logon name, twice the password to avoid any typos, and uncheck all checkboxes for our lab environment. Great. Now that we have that, we can create an organizational unit for the normal groups and an organizational unit for pilot groups. An organizational unit is a way we can organize stuff, users, groups, computer accounts in an Active Directory. So right-click on the domain in the left side of the window and select New Organizational Unit. And call it Domain Normal Groups. Keep the checkbox to protect it from accidental deletion, and create a second organizational unit called Domain Pilot Groups. Click OK, and make sure that you are within the organizational unit Domain Normal Groups. Right-click in the empty space and create a new group this time. Before, we've created new users, and now we are creating a new group. We are calling the group Employees. As you can see in the bottom left side of this window, we have 3 options within Group Scope. So what is a group scope? If you have a larger environment, perhaps with multiple domains which trust each other, then you can define the scope in which this group can do things. For example, if you select Domain Local, then you can add accounts from this domain, Acme Corp, and from any trusted domain. But with this group, you can only grant permissions within this domain we are in, within Acme Corp, within the local domain. So that's why it's called a Domain Local group. If you choose Global, that means that you can add accounts to this group only from this domain, from the same domain. But this group scope type can grant permissions to objects in any domain in the same forest. Remember, forest, domain, domain, domain. Or to trusting domains or forests, which could be in another organization, for example. If you choose the group scope Universal, you can add accounts from any domain within the same forest. Also, with a universal group, you can use it to grant permissions to any domain or forest or trusting forest, which could be another organization. So bottom line, the group scope Global is the default group scope because it allows you to add only accounts from the same domain, but you can use it to grant permissions to other domains within the same forest, which is, in my opinion, the use case you will use most often in your daily business. So we're going to keep the group scope at Global. And on the bottom right of the wizard window, you see that you can also select the group type. You have to choose between security group and distribution group. Security group is usually the group type you want because this allows you to assign permissions to other objects in the Active Directory. And the distribution group is a group which can be used to distribute emails to the members of the group. For example, distribution groups are used in the Microsoft Exchange server for mail distribution groups. In the background, if you create a mail distribution group in the Active Directory, it will create automatically a distribution group. So you could do that manually here if you'd like. What we want in our lab environment is a security group. Then click OK and create a new group again called Management. Also group scope global and group type security. If you right click on the employees group and choose properties, you can go to members and add the users we want in this security group. And we want Donald Duck in this group and Daisy Duck and Mickey Mouse. So these are the employees in our Acme Corp test corporation. Click OK and do the same thing with the management group. Right click properties, go to members, and here we're gonna add Dagobert Duck. Click OK. Now that we have these two groups, we can use them in later episodes to assign permissions, for example, to folders in shares to this group. Alright, now that you have a basic understanding about users and groups in the Active Directory, you can think back about 10 minutes when we've created the user client.admin, which we assigned to the group local administrators on each client PC. Also, as I stated in the introduction, this was a suboptimal way to assign local administrator permissions to a client PC, because people in company change, and if they know the password, they can take it with them and log in to all those client PCs with administrative permissions. Now you could say, no problem, if someone leaves the company, I will just change the password on the server, because you can do that now. But still, all other employees which are in the IT department and should have local administrative permissions on the client PCs would share the same password, so there's no way of tracking which person of the IT department made which change on the client PC with administrative permissions. What we want to have is a domain global group which is a member of the local administrator groups of the clients. So that way it's possible that you can, on the server, assign various members of your IT department to the group client admins, or however you will call it, and then you assign this group to the client PCs, so you have a way of controlling which people have administrative permissions on the client PCs locally. We're going to do that now together in a practical example. Make sure that you are within the organization unit domain normal groups. Right click in the empty space and create a new group. We're gonna call the group Client Admins. Group scope global and group type security, of course. You open the properties of the client admin group and go to members, and here we're going to add the user we have created, client admin. As you can see in the selection, when you click on check names, you get all strings resolved which look similar to client admin. So it's the user client.admin and the group client admins we have just created. Make sure you pick the user object, not the group object, and click OK. If we test that now, there should be no visible effect because we're still going to log in with our user client admin. But the local PC will resolve in what local groups a member is, and then the user client admin will indirectly have administrative permissions through the group client admins we've created here, because we're going to add the group client admins to the local administrator groups on the client PCs. We are going to create a second user just so I can showcase that this scenario works. We're going to call that user just a test or whatever you like. When you have created this temporary test user, make sure that you add this user also to our newly created group client admins. Properties, members, add, and then the test user. Check names, click OK. And now you can go to WhoAmI-Client 01. Right click on the Windows logo, go to Computer Management. Go to Local Users and Groups, as we did before multiple times. Choose the properties of the Local Administrators group. And here you can see we have our client.admin domain user, which we now have to remove and replace by the client admins group. So add the client admins group. Again, check names, click OK. And remove the client.admin user. Click OK to close the property window and just sign out. Select Other User and we're going to log in with our test user just for fun. Now we have to prove that this user we have just created and who has never logged in before to this PC really has administrative permissions. We're proving that by configuring something in the system which requires administrative permissions. So we're gonna start the control panel, go to System and Security, select System and change settings where it says Computer Name. As you can see, the window opened, and this window only opens if you have administrative permissions locally on this PC. So you can click Cancel. We do not actually want to change something here, and you can sign out again of WhoAmI-Client 01. Now please switch to WhoAmI-Client 02. And log in if necessary with the local user client admin, because we have to do the same thing. Go to Computer Management, Local Users and Groups, select the administrative group and add the client admins group from the domain and remove the client.admin user from this group. Click OK. And sign out of WhoAmI-Client 02. Now we have proved that our concept works. What we still have to test, however, is how the clients react if we remove a user from the client admins group. So let's say just the test user just left the company and we're removing it from the group client admins. Let's see how the clients react to that. So go to WhoAmI-GC 01 and choose the properties of the client admins group. Select the user just the test and remove it. Confirm the prompt and click OK. So the client admins groups now just contains the user client.admin and nothing else. Go to WhoAmI-Client 01 and restart the client. When the restart is complete, try to log in again with the test user. As you can see, the login still worked because the user still exists in the domain. It's just no longer a member of the client admins group. If we do the same test again, open the control panel, go to Systems and Security, to System and try to change the computer name. You will get a prompt which says you have to provide a user with local administrative permissions to continue, because you don't have local administrative permissions anymore. You can sign out again of WhoAmI-Client 01. And now we're also going to delete the user just a test from the Active Directory. So go to Domain Normal Users select just the test and delete the user. If you would restart a client again and then try to log in with the user just a test, then also the login would fail. Alright, this was quite a long video. Again, sorry, but there's so much to say, and I hope that you now have an understanding of how the users and groups and organizational units work together. There's a lot more to it, but we cannot cover everything in these basic lab scenarios. So we're now ready to continue with our next episode, where we will create shares and assign permissions to the shares, and we'll test the whole thing and play around with it a little bit. If you like these videos, please click the like button, and if you want to be informed about the next episode, please subscribe and ring the bell. Stay tuned, see you next time.